Hello everyone, welcome back to Maritime SoftwareHub, the People Podcast. Today, I'm really excited to be joined by Andrew Rains, the Senior Sales Director at Tocaro Blue. Hello, Andrew, welcome to the show. And love it if you could introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about your background and what you do.
Sure thing. Yeah, thanks for having me, Callum. This is it's always exciting to get the opportunity to talk about our products and capabilities, and I think it fits really well with the topic of your show because we are focused on building maritime software products. Tocaro Blue is based in the southern part of the United States, and we build maritime perception software. So we kind of work in between like a radar or a camera sensor and an autonomous action that the boat takes. So we process the data from the sensor and kind of upskill it, make it more modern, software defined, and use AI to make sure that the perception that the boat's receiving is as good as it can possibly be.
Very interesting. Well, that's the kind of, the main theme and discussion today is the kind of perception layer powering the unmanned marine kind of growth we're seeing in across the maritime space and also the defense market. So really excited to go through this with you and also learn more about your background and how you kind of plan to build out the go-to-market and kind of commercial function within your teams there. So what kind of prompted you to make the move into this sort of autonomous software space originally?
Yeah, it's a great question. Tocaro Blue's background really is as a recreational product company for the marine space. And I was actually part of a separate organization who was a vendor for Tocaro Blue. We were called Moxie IoT, and we developed Internet of Things products. So we were like an engineering contractor, and we built hardware and software solutions for our clients. And Tocaro Blue was one of our clients. And they ended up seeing an opportunity with a product we had started working on. That's what today is called Proteus Core, and it's a AI-based radar processing software. But at the time, the whole idea was just like distill the information from the radar because a marine radar is complicated to understand. It's not really, it hasn't been modernized in the way that we kind of expect to interact with sensors. It's very, very different than like driving a modern car on the road and just getting collision alerts. Boats don't have that functionality, and so we just saw the opportunity for a streamlined navigation interface that took the data from the radar and then provided you with a potential collision alert, so you could avoid a collision on the water. And that kind of started our journey down to this kind of rabbit hole of processing marine data or marine radar data with machine learning algorithms, and that kind of made us realize that we were solving too big of a problem. What really needed to be solved was like, how do we get this AI and ML inferencing capability on a boat?
Okay.
Not like, producing a display that takes over the boat and drives it autonomously and avoids collisions. That's a big problem set that's being addressed by a lot of players. But how do we just make the data from the radar usable for that use case is what we really discerned from our kind of initial go-to-market efforts.
Understood. So your software embeds into existing radars and hardware on board vessels, or do you also sell your own software as well? Hardware.
Yeah, good question. It can run on existing hardware. On most, I would say, like the unmanned vessel segment always has the compute overhead required for the Proteus Core software to run. A normal like fishing boat or just average recreational vessel doesn't typically have the hardware in place that's required, which is how we've kind of ended up in this unmanned vessel, autonomous vessel space where defense companies are leveraging our software and capabilities because we can just embed it directly as a software solution. And we do have a hardware. It's a dev kit that we use for the manned vessel applications. It's not a product per se that we're selling at scale, but we do that for testing. We do it for kind of initial partnership validation. So our go-to-market strategy is essentially providing our customers with our dev kit device, makes it easy for them to install it, communicate with our API, and get the information out of Proteus Core. And then we move into a kind of take them through a technical journey where we build an executable application specifically for their hardware on their boat.
Understood. Okay. And is that more of a one-off kind of pricing model, or do you have a subscription as well for the software?
It's a perpetual license. So we found, especially for the defense market, we try to avoid the subscription model because we don't want to depend on, that boat being able to connect to the internet to validate the license. That just creates a huge rabbit hole of complexity and problems for for a boat that's going into a combat zone or a contested area, or, GPS or communications denied area. So we approach it a little differently. It's a one-time perpetual license, and then we have an optional annual maintenance fee where if that boat has the ability to connect to the internet, we can send updates to the machine learning models to increase the performance as we grow our data set and increase our capability with the AI software that we're building. And so that's an optional feature. It doesn't affect the license activation. So yeah, it's basically a optional subscription, if you want to call it that. It's really, we don't really treat it as a subscription. It's more of an additional SKU that's sold on an annual basis. But and that's specifically for the defense space. For a recreational space, we're more flexible on subscription versus not in terms of the licensing model. But typically, it's still a perpetual license. Yeah.
And are you mainly speaking to focus on B2B essentially, or more on the commercial markets, and I guess targeting businesses with fleets, or do you also sell to individual vessel owners?
Yeah, good question. No, we're almost exclusively focused on business to business enterprise sales. So we want to sell to a company who is building either they're a vertically integrated boat builder where they are designing the software stack and the hardware stack. So for USVs, that's very common these days with new USV companies. In the UK, you have a company called Kraken Technologies that's a great example of that, where they're building the hull, the electronic suite, integrating it all, and then also leveraging and building their own autonomy software. So that's a perfect example of like who our client is, because they control kind of the keys to the perception stack and the autonomy decision-making software and things of that nature. So we don't really sell to individual boaters, but we will like work with companies on individual projects if there's a larger relationship there. So if an electronics OEM reaches out to us and says, "Hey, I have a project," and the customer's requesting radar data to be brought into the UI, we will work with them in hopes of that turning into a broader scale project, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, very interesting model. Okay.
Yeah.
And I think you mentioned that you joined the company very early on and one of the early kind of team members in the commercial sort of function. So what was that experience like, and what did the business look like then?
Yeah, great question. I came at it from the perspective of basically selling engineering services to Tocaro Blue. And so that was a really interesting transition where I went from Tocaro Blue being my customer to now running the sales and revenue generation and partnership components of the Tocaro Blue business. So it was like a very dichotomous 180 flip. My personal background is actually in high performance driving, so I do a lot of driver instruction, driver training was what I actually started doing after graduating from a college university. And we built our first AI ML based product to sell to motorsports enthusiasts. So people that drive, a sports car on the racetrack for fun that was kind of our client base. And that was one of the projects that kind of built the skill set for sensor processing using machine learning methodologies to get better information out of an available off the shelf sensor. And then, that I grew the go-to-market for that, or led the go-to-market efforts for that company as basically a half owner and co-founder in the business. Yeah. And so a lot of the skills and things that I developed from that, we've had a hardware product, we had an app, a mobile app that had a subscription. And so I led every aspect of the commercial side of that business. And so that equipped me pretty well to go into this role with Moxie. I built a dealer network out for that company. And then as Moxie IoT, I led the sales efforts for that as well, and worked closely with our engineering team to scope projects and provide statements of work to our clients, and then dealt with the project management function as well on the backside of the sales. So I had to really deeply embed myself, and have always been very embedded with our engineering team. So I've had to understand technical bottlenecks, how we offer the solution, what the technical solution actually is. And so those kind of combination of those skill sets was like really... it was a good marriage for the Tocaro Blue role now, which is like both a very complex technical niche solution that we're selling in an enterprise sale that's a very long sales cycle, but also it's it's an AI ML solution, software only. It's not a hardware device. So like being able to communicate all those things in terminology that a client understands requires a deeply technical background and understanding. And so I'm thankful to have those experiences to kind of like be able to communicate with our clientele.
Yeah, I think that's really impressive background, and I'm sure as this business evolves as well, you have lots of different insights you can share. And I think nearly all of the companies that we recruit for, and in case any of the audience are not aware, Tocaro Beaumont is primarily a recruitment agency, and we help maritime technology companies hire leaders and commercial profiles. And generally, we see the majority of clients in the sales team look for people with that hands-on industry expertise, or at least the contacts so they can articulate the value of the solution, perhaps better to quite a tricky customer or more of an enterprise level customer where there's lots of decision makers and processes along the way. So I think that sounds like you got ideal background. I'm sure the team love having you there. And what sort of challenges have you faced as you've been kind of building your go-to-market strategy?
Certainly, there's a lot of challenges with any go-to-market strategy. At the end of the day, I think the best way to answer that is to think about our business model from at scale and what it looks like when we're selling thousands of licenses, and I'll kind of back into like the challenges. So at the end of the day, the licensing model that we've chosen is kind of a revenue share component with our clients, essentially. Like the more boats that our USB clients sell or that our recreational partners sell their software or hardware onto, the more money that we make. And it is kind of a, quote unquote, mailbox money or passive income generation at scale, right? We essentially have no costs once we just greenlight, a software license for that boat, and the client's good to go. And our software runs and does its thing and offers value to the client. And that's the end state, right? We're hopefully selling thousands of those licenses a year. And that's, it's not truly a passive income stream, right? But it's a high margin income stream.
Yeah.
So with any, as I'm sure from all your business experience too, like that sounds great, right? But no business model is perfect. They all have the flip side, right? So when you choose that business model, that means that the effort that you have to put in on the front end, meaning like the architecture, the relationships, the enterprise sales, the structure, the tons of customer acquisition cost and investment in the client, and then the ability to service the client on the back end. So account managers and technical, salespeople and engineering managers who can support that, and custom R&D work, and ensuring that the product's working, and then like being available to answer clients' questions almost all hours of the day because these are being used in a defense context. That's where the complexity and the cost is. So all of those things are some of the challenges. And I would say from a technical perspective, it's getting the architecture right so that when a customer has a problem, it's a relatively simple fix. And it's not something that a senior member of the team has to deal with. It's something that, a more entry-level member of the team can address technically. And then on the commercial side, I think it's the complexity of the relationship building and understanding all the different forces and things that are happening in the market, in the industry. Because in the autonomous marine space, you've got vertically integrated USB companies that are selling defense-oriented USVs. They do every part of the tech stack, with vendors. And then you've got like a boat builder who will leverage software and hardware from an autonomy company that builds an autonomy solution and an autopilot, hardware solution. And that's kind of a different customer profile. And then you've got recreational customers who are, maybe I'm building a marine camera solution and I want to ingest radar tracks, and our software is the best way to do that. Or I'm building a smart autopilot system and I want the boat to slow down instead of ramming straight on into a target that the radar detected. Those are all examples of like the value that our software would add. But those are very different relationships that have to be dealt with and managed. And maybe the biggest challenge to kind of wrap it all in a bow is just customer education. So what does our software really do? What are its limitations? And I would say that having salespeople and commercial people who are comfortable explaining the value of the software and not degrading our commercial or enterprise value or relational value, but also communicating the limitations so that a customer doesn't get in over their head expecting our software to do everything and then some, and then having a collision, or there's a high liability component to being in the perception layer. So that's probably one of the bigger challenges as we scale, is finding people with those kind of capabilities. And that's those relational aspects are not really an AI outsourcing thing yet. And I don't know that it ever will be.
That makes sense. Well, thank you for running through that. And you talked about the perception layer then again, but what do you mean by the perception kind of problem and perception as itself? In what context are we referring to?
Yeah, great question. So perception is, if you imagine that an autonomous vessel is a human, I think the best way to think about it is that the perception would just be your senses, right? Your eyes, your ears. And so your sensors as a human, your eyes, if you have good vision, they're very, very good. They interpret information around you, and then your brain can make some decision about how to interact with the world. So we are the eyes, we are the ears, we are we're kind of the connection between your eyes seeing something and your brain making a decision about it. So we're processing that information that the sensors take in. So the perception layer is the sensing suite interprets the world. We take that interpretation, that raw information received from the sensor, and we apply context to it with machine learning and AI. So just like you provide context to a large language model when you query it, you may upload a document, or you may reference a URL, or you may say, hey, based on your background and knowledge of being able to scrape information off the internet, ChatGPT, that's context. We provide that context in the form of our AI that we built internally, that's millions and millions of marine radar blobs and detections from customer boats out on the water that our hardware has been deployed on, our own in-house testing boats, our existing clients' boats, if they allow for it. We harvest all that data. We architect machine learning models that interpret it and make decisions about what those radar blobs are. And that's the perception aspect of it, which is just taking the raw sensor, in this case, the radar, and adding some value, some context to the information that the sensor sees, and then providing that information to an autonomy system or a human operator that can make a decision, which is a very different thing than perception. Perception is upstream of autonomy, right? I would say that there's sensing, perception, and then the decision making. And decision making is either an autonomous system, a computer, or it's a human, or typically, more typically right now, a combination of the two.
Great, thank you. And what are there problems, or have people raised flags and I guess potential objections you get when selling the solution around the kind of perception piece? Is that something you encounter often, or it's not really much of a topic?
Yeah, there's definitely. I mean, like in any sales process, there's plenty of objections. I would say that we have a really strong position right now because there's not a lot of we don't have really direct competition in what we're doing. There's not a lot of people when you look at applying machine learning to marine radar, selling it as a software only solution with our go-to-market strategy. There's not an analog to that in the industry, so we do have a unique opportunity there that prevents a lot of objections because there's not an easy comp for someone to go get. Those comps are very, very different solutions. And so that helps us overcome objections, but it also creates objections because there's this big white space of blue sky opportunity that doesn't quite always make sense. So we do have to provide a lot of context and information about our solution to our clients. So there's a big client education component, I would say. And sometimes that client education is educating clients about the physical limitations of marine sensors. So nothing to do with Proteus Core or our software. It's, hey, sensors can do X, Y, and Z. They can't do A, B, and C.
Okay.
And so presenting that information so that they understand the world that our software lives within is very important. And then in some cases, like dealing with a lot of marine companies, you have experts who understand the industry really well and understand what a radar is capable of and what a marine camera is capable of and what its limitations are. And in that case, it's more about declaring and sharing the performance of our software and the delta of improvement that sensor sees when it uses our software versus the existing legacy solution that's there. So those are kind of the two ways that we have to handle those objections. Like, here's the performance and the capability and the white papers that we've generated and all the technical documents that we've generated to show that. And then the other end is just like, oh yeah, a marine radar can only do these things. It can't see through buildings. It can't, interpret magical things. It can't see through the horizon. Right? Yeah. There's all sorts of It's dependent on the mounting height. There's all sorts of limitations, and that's with any solution, right? Physics dominate our world. At the end of the day, everything's defined by the real world.
Yeah. Okay. And how do you see this space, and especially the USVs? You talked about the automotive and your previous projects you worked on. How do you feel like, compared to other industries that you're seeing, are we kind of quite far along in that space, or do you feel like we're very much in the infancy of what we're building at the moment?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and a super dynamic question in terms of even which industry is the most comparable to marine autonomy. The easy analog is automotive autonomy, so Google's Waymo or other self-driving car solutions. I think the better analog is potentially aerial drones, aerial unmanned systems, just because the navigation environments may be more similar. On the water, there's no lanes, there's no, there's a much more open, broad interpretation of where you can put the vessel. Just like in the air, you have 3D kind of space, and there's a lot of open space. And so the navigational requirements are like super different than a car. Whereas with a car, there's a very defined place to put the vehicle. And so that constraint, as with any like engineering problem, constraints actually help solve the problem, because now you kind of know the world that you're solving for, right? You kind of have a box to work within. And so you kind of know, you don't have an unlimited scope creates, theoretical solutions that are, of course, they're possible, but they take endless time and money. And then the other thing I'll say to that is, like, the automotive space has had tons of capital thrown at solving this autonomous vehicle problem. Tons of capital, tons of industry and financial reasons to have autonomous cars to some extent, whether that's mitigating crashes or just, more convenient for robo taxis and things of that nature, or just making, the interaction with the human driver, ADAS systems, advanced driver assistance systems, making cars safer. There's a lot of financial incentive for that. And there's even regulatory incentive for that. So cars have to have backup cameras. They have to have blind spot detection. They have to have lane keep assist. These things are standard now for vehicles. There's none of those standards, none of that regulation in the marine industry. So there hasn't been a driving force behind adoption of autonomous technologies for boats. And also, when you look at the recreational marine industry, which is where most of the boats on the water are people enjoying themselves out on the water. There's a ton of commerce and commercial shipping, and of course that's the lifeblood of our planet. But there's also a bunch of people on the water just for fun, and they don't, they're not sitting there going, "Oh wow, I wish my boat could drive it myself." It's almost like the fact that I'm driving my boat is the escape from the world where the car drives me around and everything's automated. That's not I'm not willing to pay as a boater more money for the boat to drive me around.
Yeah.
Autopilots existed for I don't know how long, and oftentimes you don't even have to look where you're going in open water for an hour already, right? So it's just not a big problem set that has to be solved. But last point, because this is a long-winded answer, but there's a big complexity difference between marine autonomy and automotive autonomy. They're not the same problem to solve, and if you approach it as it's the same problem, your solution will fall apart very quickly. And I think we've seen people try to transition from automotive to marine and to realize what a different problem space and problem set it is.
Yeah, and I think even we see comparisons to the aviation industry as well, as you mentioned drones and things. Which sector would you say is getting the most kind of perhaps investment, or is adopting the technology the quickest? You talked a lot about defense. I don't know if you do too much on the cruise side of shipping or for commercial maritime. Are there any kind of clear signals that one area seems to be adopting these sort of technology initiatives a lot quicker?
Absolutely, yeah. Defense is the easy answer there for sure. I think there's a more pressing need in defense than ever for unmanned vessels that can perform functions, whether it's logistics, interdiction and attack, surveillance and ISR, port security. There's just a huge demand to vessels that might inherently be at risk when they go into a security environment or in a war or in combat scenario. To get a human off that boat, to save the human life, to upskill the human operator who's now behind a desk. Instead of controlling one boat, they're managing a fleet of vessels that can perform different functions that have, semi-autonomous and autonomous capabilities. Also, one of the big things that I don't think is talked about as much, but is a huge driver economically, is that when you remove human factor considerations from a vessel design, it dramatically reduces the cost. So even a small boat, you no longer have to have a bathroom. You no longer have to have some place to prep food. You don't have to have stairs going in access to every compartment. The design constraints are totally different and way simpler. Now you're just looking at a hull with an engine and a powertrain, and then whatever the payload is that needs to go on the boat. So there's lots of practical reasons to go to an unmanned solution, and defense is definitely the place where there's the most justification for that. Recently with the conflict in Iran, we saw a couple of American fighters were shot down by friendly fire. They didn't end up over the water, but if they had, going and rescuing those people with an unmanned vessel is a very relevant way to do that. Putting an unmanned boat out there, that means that you could have a smaller vessel because it only needs to carry the downed pilot. It doesn't get in harm's way on its way to the crash site. There's all sorts of good reasoning for those types of. There's a million different applications for it. Contested logistics is a huge requirement. So, going through dangerous shipping channels with a boat that can deliver a bunch of forward deployed munitions or even just logistics, food, supplies to soldiers in a combat zone without having a human at risk on that boat, and also doing it in a scale way. Right, again, less expensive vessel. If it gets destroyed, there's less cost there to the taxpayer or whoever is kind of footing the bill. There's a million economic reasons in defense, and I'm of the opinion that defense will be the place where those technologies are tested and proven, and then that will trickle down into the commercial marine space. And then one day, I think consumer vessels will have semi-autonomous capabilities, and we'll see what the average boater wants on their boat.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's very, obviously my background, I'm from the UK and we moved out to the States around a year and a half ago or so. And it's almost the opposite. The investment is far richer in the commercial shipping space and the digitalization of those markets as opposed to the defense. Whereas here it seems to be the other way around, obviously. And I think obviously the States have a much larger kind of defense budget and everything.
Definitely.
That's very interesting. Okay, good. And I guess sort of going forward for the team and Tocaro Blue, how do you sort of see the company evolving over the next couple of years?
Yeah, that's another really good question. These are all really fun topics to discuss. I think there's a lot of different ways that the company can evolve. The roadmap that we see right now is trying to own the perception space. We want to be the company people think of when they think of maritime perception. And broadly, that's not, a hot topic of oh, wow, I wonder who is the dominant player in perception. We think that the perception space is the harder problem to solve than autonomous guidance and decision making. Harder from the standpoint of processing the sensor information, distilling what's a real target and what isn't, communicating that appropriately on the vessel to the sensors. The autonomous decision-making part is more mature, and that's why I would say it's less difficult. There's whole regs that kind of enforce how vessels should maneuver around each other. So there's frameworks for autonomous decision-making. Those types of things make that space more defined, whereas the space that we live in, I would say, needs a lot more. We need more competition. We need more people that are focused on adding value to off-the-shelf sensors, not exquisite military defense sensors. That's not the future, I don't think. I think the future is upskilling the lower cost hardware that exists and that will exist for a long time so that it can provide better information to the unmanned systems and to the manned vessels. And so that's everything that we'll do growing from this point will be to dominate the perception space and be the most value added player in that area, where if you want to build an unmanned vessel, you're going to have our software. If you want to build a manned vessel with intelligent collision avoidance that knows what's around it, you're going to need our software and our capabilities. Everything we do is going to be in that direction. So we'll be continuing to build out our capabilities with our radar solution. We'll be continuing to build out capabilities with other marine sensors, whether it's optical, infrared, LiDAR, whatever the sensor modality is. Eventually undersea capabilities would be fantastic as well to add another layer of perception.
Yeah.
So yeah, we just want to dominate the perception space and be a good partner to people who need that type of capability.
Very exciting. And what type of people do you feel the company will need, obviously, to realize that vision in terms of kind of commercial or even technical talent? Do you see yourself out, if you're not already outsourcing kind of development to different regions or keeping everything in-house?
Yeah, we're mostly in-house in terms of engineering. So we'll outsource, things that are not core competencies, build versus buy decisions. So things like generating a simulation tool for building our software or other things of that nature. But in terms of like building machine learning models, architecting those, building out tracking algorithms, marine radar specialists and data labelers for AI data sets, things of that nature, that's all done in-house. We're not outsourcing any of that capability. So we do have a big hiring need on the technical side in terms of finding skilled software engineers who want to work in a problem space that requires understanding of the use case. That's not, we need people who want to affect the real world. All of our software interacts very closely with hardware. And I would say it's challenging to find that talent. That's a big growth pain point for us for sure, is just like finding those people. And then on the commercial side, the space that I deal in, typically it hasn't been our bottleneck for growth to this point, but we're definitely onboarding enough clients that people that, we will need skilled commercial people who know how to negotiate deals, know how to add value to the client, and mainly I would say can translate the technical capabilities of the product to the client, not in a misleading way, right? Like very clearly exposing limitations, but all the while adding value to the client, right? I think those are definitely difficult roles to find, because you need someone who has the ability to kind of get in the headspace of the engineering team a little bit and not get distracted by the constraints and the problems they're dealing with, and stay focused on the commercial opportunities, but also make sure that you're not misleading a customer down the wrong path. And then all of a sudden we get to talking about pricing and onboarding the software, and they have a misunderstanding of capabilities. Definitely salespeople can create those problems if they're not grounded in what the product's capabilities are. So we want to onboard talent that can help scale with that. And then we have such a big defense presence, people who are connected in industries with industry specific knowledge. That's a very important growth point for us as well. And we recently hired a gentleman who had a lot of experience in the USV space and has brought a lot of capability to our team in terms of knowledge of the space. As you heard in my background, most of our team comes from a very technology oriented background, and we have a lot of marine product experience, but I wouldn't say that we are, salty on the water guys, 6 days a week, just understanding that space. We're really technologists. And so we've been very intentional to grow the team with more boaters and more people who have been embedded in the industry, because I do think that to deliver the solution that we've delivered and that we've built, you have to have the technology first approach, because it's fundamentally a technology problem, but you've got to very much ground it and infuse it with real world knowledge of the space.
Yeah. Great. That sounds very exciting. And I'm looking forward to seeing how the team evolves and how projects unfolds going forward. Is there anything else you'd like to kind of share about the Tocaro Blue or anything else we've discussed today?
Yeah, I mean, just a plug would be check out tocaroblue.com, and you can download our technical product summary there by just putting in your email address. It's a great high level overview. If what I've said today resonates, I know it's a niche topic, but it is extremely important for keeping mariners safe on the water, for keeping warfighters that end up in contested areas safe with unmanned vessels, and for keeping yourself safe on your boat on the weekend. So check out tocaroblue.com and download our product summary, especially if you're an engineer or a technical person or a BD person in the marine space and you have some interest in, upskilling the existing sensors on your fleet of vessels. If you have a radar on those boats, we can probably help you. So let's have a conversation.
Awesome. Oh, great. Well, thank you very much, Andrew. Yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time to share your insights and yeah, go into detail about your type of customers that you work with and what's happening in your space. So, yeah, if anybody has any questions, is it the best way to reach out to you on LinkedIn or visit the website, as you said?
Yeah, LinkedIn is a great way. Feel free to message me on LinkedIn directly. I try to do my best to check that every day. And then, yeah, our website has a contact, way to just like directly reach out to our team. And I see all of those queries as well, so I can respond to folks that input their information there. Would love to help and yeah, be a value added provider for anyone in the marine space with perception needs. Yeah. Thanks for the great questions. This was a fun discussion.
Pleasure. And it's great. I mean, and the more time we spend out here in the States and we're uncovering some really interesting businesses and they're solving some very complex and exciting problems. So, yeah, pleasure to speak with you. And thank you for everyone for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed the discussion and let's speak again soon. All right.
Sounds good.
Thanks, you. Take care. Take care.